Good afternoon, Natasha. Good afternoon, chat as well too. What's going on, everyone?
Hey, Anthony. Glad we
Hello.
made it.
Yeah, we made. So, what the chat and everyone didn't see is Natasha and I have been trying to get this. Well, mostly it's me trying to experiment with stuff over here, and Natasha's being very patient with me as I'm testing out different stuff. So we made it. We made it to today's stream. Thank you for being here, Natasha.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So we've got a little chat here on the side. I believe I can go and I can pull it up. Yeah, I can do something like that. We can actually see the chat live with us. So I think there's about 11 people over here. We're streaming to our Twitch, to YouTube, and to X. We've got all three platforms going on today. So brand new experimental feature. Again, thank you, Natasha, for working with me on this.
We're in it together. We're all on this journey, you know?
So cool. Well, good afternoon and good evening and good morning, everyone, depending on wherever you might be. We've got a bunch of people in chat. And so today we've got a brand new podcast with the very first guest. Our inaugural speaker for this podcast series is Natasha Wettstein. I just learned how to pronounce her name properly. I was butchering it last time. Good to have you. Natasha, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing better now. I had a bit of a freak out earlier with our audio, my audio issue, but I'm doing well now. So it's been a good week.
That a good old restart couldn't fix, you know?
Yes. So actually, yeah, good point on that. You know what the solution was to everyone listening in right now is I actually just had to reboot my computer. I had to turn it off and on again. That was it.
Yeah.
So, who would have thought?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Karina's here. Jordan is here as well too. We'll see who continues to roll in, and then we're just going to start diving into it and getting to know more about who you are and hearing your story. So give another minute over there for everyone to join.
All right. Take a sip of our respective caffeinated beverages. You know, what you got over there? What's your poison of choice?
My poison of choice, I've got black coffee. Actually, McCafe instant black coffee is my poison of choice this week. How about you?
All right. I've got a oat milk latte with it's a matcha latte, so not technically coffee, but very sensitive to caffeine, so I can only do so much coffee. But matcha seems to agree with me a little bit better.
Yeah. Oat milk matcha latte. Not bad.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Not bad. So you're the one that goes to Starbucks and then orders.
I'm not one. I'm literally
you're the one with like 20 ingredients. That's it.
100%.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and I guess we can start diving into it. And I guess what we can get started off with over here, Natasha, is who are you? Tell us more about who you are, your story. You know, what are you doing right now? I know you're a threat intelligence analyst, right?
Yeah. So I've had a little bit of a circuitous journey through cybersecurity, but from when I started kind of getting interested in it, I think threat intelligence was something that I'd been interested in since starting my education. And I feel very lucky to be currently employed as a threat intelligence analyst, finally. Currently working at Proofpoint, which is an email security provider, amongst other things. We also do some user awareness training and things like that. And we can get more into like what that role looks like over here a little bit later. But before I got into security, also very circuitous journey. But I studied neuroscience and psychology in college with the intention of getting into like therapy of some sort. Originally, I was planning on actually treating people with psychedelics. That was my goal. So I did some like volunteer work around that, and some of like the organizations that were doing, you know, legal research into that during my time in college, and that was pretty cool. And basically what happened was at the end, after I graduated with those 2 degrees, I was like, okay, like I'd love to be able to do more in this. And they're like, well, we need you to have a master's at least. And I was so burned out. Like I am not, I would say I'm not like the best at traditional learning methods, you know, like rote learning, textbook, sitting in a class, like doesn't really do well for me. So I decided to take a little break, and I met some people during that break who worked in the tech industry. And one of the things that I was also struggling with at the time, right, was like, okay, if I end up becoming a therapist, for example, what does that life look like? Like at the
Yeah.
time, this is pre-pandemic, of course, like that looked like going to an office every day, and talking to people, which I love doing, but you're really stuck to a space, like a place, right? Because you had an office and you have your clientele and they're local to your area. And I come from a very international family. My last name's very German, right? I travel a lot, like to see my family and to see friends. And so I couldn't really imagine myself being in a role where I wasn't able to travel with my work. And so I kind of went back to the drawing board in a way and was like, okay, well, what kind of jobs can I do that pay well and I can still, afford to do the things that I want to do in life and also have the flexibility of space and travel. And so when I met these people who were in tech, they're like, oh, well, why don't you just, get into tech? Because we all work remotely. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? Right.
Yeah.
And so kind of delved into that a little bit more. And it's actually kind of funny because I had considered cybersecurity in some way or another as a teenager, and then it kind of like fell off, and we can get into that a little bit more later. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was just kind of like I taught myself how to do graphic design because I'm also an artist, right? And that was the easiest thing for me to like wrap my head around doing in the tech space. And that turned into, okay, well, you created this banner for me for my website. Can you put it on the website? Like, yeah, I guess I could do that. Sure. Put it on the website. They're like, oh, while you're on there, could you also like fix this other thing? Could you create a new page? Also, we need like this other thing changed. Can you just rebuild the whole thing? I think we need an update, right?
Yep,
So it kind of just snowballed into this thing where I was doing a lot more web-based stuff for people. And yeah, I was traveling at the same time, making decent money as like an independent contractor. And yeah, I was enjoying that for a while until the pandemic hit, amongst like a few other things. I had some other businesses that I was running as well.
Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, everything shut down, right? And I had a few boot camps that I had been researching and ended up going to. I went to two. The first one was before I went to CDA. But yeah, so I went to that one and during the pandemic. So I just kind of completely switched careers. And within 9 months of starting that boot camp, had a job. So definitely feeling very grateful for cybersecurity and like all the freedoms that it allows me and how interesting it is.
Nice. That's quite a varied background. I think it explains a lot about you in a nice, like, summarized kind of manner right there. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I'm hearing a lot how you were pretty self-starting, like really self-initiating and kind of saying yes to that technical interest that sort of to develop from the web development space, getting yourself over to cybersecurity. And it's funny because that's kind of how it goes, right? Like it's all of a sudden people just start asking you to do more things. Like, do you want to take on this? You want to take on that? And it sounds like you did.
Yep.
And that really started to open up a lot of doors for you. So very interesting. But
Mhm.
what's that story? What happened as a teenager? I heard something saying like you were thinking about cybersecurity back then, and then it came to you later. So
So you want to know what's
come
funny
on,
about
right?
that? So I came across a book, which I have since actually purchased again because I was curious. It's called Steal This Computer Book. And
Did you
I
steal that,
remember
or did you buy
seeing
it?
it as a teenager and being like, huh,
Yeah,
bet, like what?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I was reading it and I'm like, wow, this is actually really interesting. It talks about like the history of hacking and kind of like the hacker mindset. And then it goes into like networking principles and all of this other stuff, right? And so that was my first introduction into like the world of cybersecurity and honestly IT in general, right? Because you imagine this is probably maybe I was like 13 or 14 or something. So 2003, 2004 or something like that, where, like I knew how to type and use a computer and instant messaging and stuff, right? But like it's not nearly as prevalent and widespread as it was, or it is as it is now. And so I think that there was something about like the attitude of hacking that just really appealed to me, kind of like the prankster attitude and the like, let's figure out how things work and like break it, fix it, like learn how, everything goes together type of thing that very much appeals to like the way that my brain works.
Yeah.
And coming away from it, right, I'm like, okay, cool. Like this is a really interesting read, but it seems like this is all a bunch of hooligans who are doing this and not necessarily, something that one could pursue a career in, right? And so it wasn't until I met those people in tech later in life and they're like, oh no, you can do that for a job. And I was like, what? Mind completely blown. Definitely opened up that avenue to me. So I feel very grateful to them for
Yeah.
pushing me in that direction. But yeah, that's where it started for me.
Interesting. So kind of like a yearning sense. So I'm hearing a lot of undertones of like freedom, like seeking freedom and trying to kind of like carve your own path. Um, I can hear it in there from what you're saying.
Yeah,
So
it's
I think that
definitely integral to my personality.
exactly, yeah, for
For
sure.
sure.
So
Yeah,
I
I
can,
think also just like a really deep curiosity, right? And I
yeah,
think that that is kind of the underpinnings of the hacker mindset,
it
right?
is.
Is how does this work? How can I do this more efficiently? Slash shortcut it. Slash break it. Slash
Yeah,
any of the above, right? And yeah, I think those kind of go hand in hand.
seems like a pretty good fit for cybersecurity. So I can definitely see the trail that led you to this direction.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
then neuropsych, right? Kind of a little bit of a stint in that.
Mhm.
So I guess what did that initial journey look like? I know you said you were training at first. As you got introduced to cybersecurity, you were taking another boot camp. You were kind of training, getting along over there. What did that really like look like as a whole? Like, what was your routine? You were studying, you were applying. Maybe talk a little bit more about that because I think a lot of our listeners are sort of in that boat right now. Like they're like you, like they're training. Well, I mean, what 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was. They're
Mhm.
kind of you at that point in time. So
Right.
tell me
Yeah,
more kind of about that.
and I guess one could argue that there's always multiple paths, right?
Yeah.
Like and I've taken a little bit of all of them for different purposes, right? So
Mhm.
original was university, go to university and get an education, which I didn't necessarily end up using in the intended, you know, method per se, but so did that for a little while, and then of course like when teaching myself how to code, that was very self-directed learning, right? So that was a lot about and because people do that for cybersecurity as well, right? They go the cert route where they're using certs or something similar to try and gain the knowledge that they need in order to get a job as well. I think that can be good if you're extremely disciplined, which I am not always, admittedly. And so
Yeah.
I think that in the end, the boot camp ended up being the best thing for me in transitioning in career when I decided that, okay, this is actually what I'm doing right now. And I feel very confident that I want to get this done in a certain amount of time. The boot camp was the best for me and one that had a instructor and it was timed and things, right? Because the
Yeah.
self-paced, I think I tend to
Mhm.
lose focus sometimes because there's
Mhm.
all of the things in life, and I'm very ADHD, and I'm always interested in learning new things. And so the boot camp really forced me to sit down and here's the curriculum, we're going through it, and we have other people who you are doing it with, and I'm like, okay, cool, I have to
Yeah.
show up. And so that
Yep.
ended up working really well for me. And I think that when you're looking at different options for getting an education in, whatever it is that you might be pursuing, I think that keeping in mind how you learn best, and then also looking at the available resources and figuring out okay, if this is, my eventual goal, do these resources get me there? Can I
Mhm.
do self-paced? Is there a different way that I can do it? What works best for you is really the biggest question, right? And then I think talking to people also who are in the industry who might know, because obviously, and when I was starting, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know anyone who does this, so a lot of the beginning was creating a network of people who at least had some things that they could tell me about it that I could glean,
Mhm.
and hopefully make sure that I was going in the right direction and ask their opinions about. And I found that was very helpful too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard even to like this day, right? A lot of students that are still training with us is that live class environment, it makes a huge difference. That
Mhm.
there's an endless sea of on-demand content that you can go and kind of train on your own, but having that cohort with you, having people keeping you accountable, kind of like you said, right? Like it's easy to chase shiny objects. I
Mhm.
think we see that a lot with students is like, oh, I want to be a pen tester. I want to be a SOC analyst. I want to be a threat intelligence analyst. Like there's so many things that they want to chase around, but the live class environment is definitely working out pretty well. Nice,
Mhm.
cool. Yeah, I see some comms in chat. We can come back to on that over there. And this side, I think both of us, I saw
Yeah.
kind of look over there for a moment. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. So interesting. So, I mean, why? I guess what brought you over to Level Effect back then? Um,
Greg, right? So
yeah. Yeah.
Greg was actually the instructor for the first boot camp that I went to, and
Hmm.
he was the one who was like, "Hey, check out this content. Would you be interested?" Right?
Yeah.
And the answer was yes. At the time, I'm not so sure if I even had, I think I was in the process of interviewing when
Hmm.
I said yes to taking the class.
Hmm.
And then I think it was kind of just one of those things where I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll take this while I'm uh, working. And kind of part of our deal was y'all didn't really have a lot of career support content at the time. So I was like, all right, well, I mean, if I'm a person who's looking to get into cybersecurity and I'm taking your boot camp, I'm doing it because I'm trying to get a job, right? And so if you don't have career support content, I might not be as interested, right? And so Greg was like, well, you want to make it for us, in exchange for
Yeah.
part of tuition? And I was like, deal,
Yeah.
like,
It worked out pretty well that way. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, so I get more education and you
Hmm.
guys get the career support. And so, yeah, that was really fun. And I think that to me, the way that I approach learning in general, right? And I don't know if you've done any like partner dancing at all, but something
I
that,
have not.
okay.
Maybe I should
So
check it out one day, but yeah.
I will say this, that I am not very good at partner dancing, but I try. I have
Mhm.
tried for a
Okay.
number of years to learn various types of partner dancing. And
Yep.
something that they always say is that it's good for you to learn how to both lead and follow, so that you can
Yes.
kind of see both sides of it, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, it's kind of the same with any discipline. Like I like the multidisciplinary approach. The more angles that I can look at a problem from, the better I think that I am at creating solutions.
Hmm.
And so for me, I think a lot of it was, okay, this is like very specialized knowledge, especially like for SOC analyst roles, like digital forensics, all of that stuff is like very integral to understanding how network systems and things like that work, right?
Hmm.
And so if I'm trying to learn, I mean, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can, right? And I think that your course had a lot of pretty in-depth and also hands-on training, which
Hmm.
obviously being how I am, like I like to do the hands-on things and like have
Yes.
that kind of repetition and confirmation that I understand what's happening through that. So there were a lot of things that appealed to me, I guess to summarize, like the depth of knowledge and like the hands-on interactiveness and
Hmm.
having good instructors who knew what they were talking about, and honestly pretty novel content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, definitely. Having that extra perspective. Good to hear. So, okay, so you went through that training, you went through us as well too. Maybe, well, I guess what happened next in the journey? I guess you were applying for jobs. You had a lot of interviews coming up.
Yeah.
What
So
was the job interview like? Yeah,
oh
great
gosh,
to hear that.
it depends on which one. So
Yeah,
let me tell you about my
some of the
process,
good ones, right? Yeah.
right? And so I don't know if anyone here has taken the CDA Bootcamp or has used the spreadsheet that I created, but back in the day when I was taking the first bootcamp, they told me, it's probably going to take you 3 months to land your first position, right?
Yeah.
And so in my brain, I'm a very systematic person, right? I'm like, okay, so there are a few things that can contribute to the success of like applying to jobs, right? And there's like a lot of different ways. It seems like network is a big thing, like having a good network of people, and then the numbers, like the amount of jobs that one has to apply to actually land one, is pretty astronomical, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at some point it like kind of becomes a volume thing.
Mhm.
um, and then, yeah, so basically I created this spreadsheet, right, where I'm like, okay, I need to be like looking for and adding, 10 people to my network per week. And then I'm applying to or reaching out to three of them in order to schedule informational interviews. And usually only one of them would reply or
Mhm.
have the time to talk to me. And then I want to be applying to at least 5 jobs per week, or I think it might have been even more than that. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my system, right? I'm like, okay, these are my goals for how I'm going to get a job, like operationally, right? And
Mhm.
then of course on the side, still like learning as much as possible, researching the different roles. And that's like the difficult thing about cybersecurity, I think. Like security engineer, for example, what does that even mean, right?
Yeah.
Like that could
Yeah.
mean so many different things, right? And so like reading the job description and understanding what you're applying for, and then trying to fill the gaps in your knowledge to make sure that if they do call you back, you at least have, some things to say before you get on the phone with them, kind of thing. um yeah, so it was very much like okay, anything that I saw that I felt like I could potentially be a good candidate for, I was applying to, seeing if I could find people within my network or maybe a second person who, worked at that location that I could talk to about the role or something like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, that took up a lot of time,
Yeah.
like applying for all those jobs. I think all in all, for my first role, I ended up interviewing at 7 different companies. I applied to like 130 different I put up 130 different applications, right?
Wow.
And like it was between 2 at the end of the day, Rapid7 and Proofpoint.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of funny. So um I ended up accepting the role from Rapid7 because they extended the offer first, and then
Yeah.
Proofpoint came back like a week later and was like, "Hey, we want to offer you this position," but I hadn't heard from them in like 2 weeks, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought that you didn't like me because
Yep.
um, you ask about like how is the interview process, right?" And like, let me tell you, there were some it's been all over the place. Like, there's the good and the bad, right? Like,
Yep.
there's,
Of
on
course.
the good side, there's like there was one woman that I talked to at Rapid7 who she was, I mean, it's always great talking to other women in cyber, right? And so talking to her about how like it is to be a woman at the company was like really nice because, for example, like one of the people who was a mentor to me, or one of my friends who was encouraging me to get into cybersecurity to begin with, like she taught herself to be a developer.
Mhm.
And she was like maybe a year ahead of me in that process. And of course, I was hearing a lot from her about how difficult it could be to be a woman in tech at the time because there weren't a lot of us, and I'm very, very, very glad to see that there are more and more.
Yep.
Um,
In there. Yeah.
yeah, that's really nice. Um, but yeah, so yeah, they're talking to and just kind of like not commiserating but connecting over
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
being the only woman in the room sometimes, and like how difficult that can be, for example, or
Yeah.
talking to another one of the hiring managers about like just some ridiculous like life stuff. I think we're talking about unicorns and rainbows and just being your best self kind of thing. I don't know, it got pretty ridiculous there, and we were both laughing our butts off. So that was the good side. The bad side is like some of the technical questions, right? We're like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like I feel so over my head. Proofpoint in particular, at the time there was a 9-person panel interviews, the final round, which is
9 all at once? Wait, or back or one after another?
all at once. Everyone was in the room. I had to like
Wow.
do a briefing, yeah, essentially, and that was probably one of the most nerve-wracking things.
Yeah.
They don't do it like that anymore, luckily. But yeah, that was probably one of the most terrifying things that I'd done at the time.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was kind of one of those things where they're like, yeah, anyone like on the team who wants to join and like see this person who's going through the final rounds, like come join, right?
Yeah.
To like see, everyone could have their impression and cast their votes or whatever, right? But on
Mhm.
the other side, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people here.
I mean, if you can handle that pressure, then I think you get the job, right? Like
Well,
9
that was
people,
the funny thing,
right?
right? Is I thought I bombed it, which is
Yeah.
why they didn't call me back, right?
Yeah.
But I guess like that someone who was integral to the process wasn't in town, like they were out of office for a week, and so that's why they didn't get back to me. But I was like, oh my god, I
Mhm.
totally bombed that. So I accepted the role at Rapid7, but I did come back around. So, and actually, it's on the same team, so I went through the same process without the 9 panel interview again
Yeah.
this time around, and yeah, now I'm working over here, so it's been good.
Interesting. Yeah, so, and this was back, what, 2020, 2021, I think it was?
That would
When
have
you were
been
kinda
2020.
2020, right? So we're coming up to, yeah, 5 years now, and honestly, not a lot has changed. Like, there's a comment over there inside of chat as well too that ZUMAT has applied to over 100 places during CDA, and I know Matt's an alumni as well too, hanging on chat. I think he's just like a couple years back from us, so it hasn't changed that much. Even students to today as well. So
Mhm.
really interesting. Tell me more about that networking piece, because you talk about that a lot. How important is it really? And I mean, tell it like it is. I'd be
Um,
really interested.
so the Rapid7 job I actually got through networking. So what I
Yeah.
did, and I guess you can do this too, right? I don't know
Mhm.
if you have like a directory page on your Discord, but basically what I did is the first boot camp I went to had like an alumni channel, and I
Mhm.
just added everyone on
Yep.
them. And I was like, hey, I'm going through the boot camp that you went through. And if there was something in their profile that I thought was interesting and I wanted to talk to them, I'd say, hey, would you be open to a informational interview? And this was during the pandemic, of course, so like
Yeah.
networking was difficult. And so that was a little bit challenging, but luckily a lot of people were willing to talk to me, and that was really nice. And I feel like that it really helped me to, one, I think like understand what different roles were and like what was possible, right? Because I think one of the difficult things about getting into cybersecurity is like there is like it's such a vast industry, right? And there's so many
Yeah.
different things that you can do that I think that it's hard to know where to start sometimes or what's possible. And so in doing that, it helped me kind of like open the door for like different options that were on the table. But your question was, sorry, what was your question?
How important was the networking piece as
Oh, okay,
well?
got it,
Which
got it.
I think
No,
you highlighted, you answered it, right? Like you were networking. That's how you got the job. So
yeah, exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, so it actually was, right? And so how
Yeah.
that happened actually was I reached out to someone who was working at Rapid7, who was an alumni
There you
of
go.
the Bootcamp,
Mhm.
and they asked me how I liked it because one of their friends was interested in going. It had been like a number of years since they had gone, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm like typed up kind of my analysis essentially, and he's like, oh, you're actually a really good writer. If you're interested, anytime in a job, let me know.
There you
And
go.
so when it was time, I reached out to him and he's like, oh yeah, we actually have a few openings. So that's how that happened. So
Well, I mean, you're highlighting something so important over there, and I'm glad that you are going on and talking about it, right? Because like the job titles themselves, cybersecurity analyst could look like 100 different things to 100 different
oh
companies.
my
Same
gosh,
like you said, security engineer, right?
yeah. Mhm.
So if it's this difficult for an applicant and a recruiter to synchronize on what they both want, then networking is clearly a much more advantageous position to get yourself towards a company. And you did just that. And it's something we advocate still to this day, just of how important it is. So I'm glad you're talking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, if
So
you can, like whatever you can do to like to build your network. So I go to a lot of local events, things like that, right? I actually run a cybersecurity meetup here in Denver. So I don't know if
yeah,
anyone's from Denver, but come join us.
if you're in Denver, go join Natasha.
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn or something.
Yeah.
I can send you the Discord information. But yeah, so I think that I'm always posting to the Discord, like open roles and things like that, or to my LinkedIn or whatever if we have open roles. So I think like just knowing who to talk to in different places is a really great place to start.
Definitely.
So I see what questions were you asked.
Yeah.
Gosh, so it really depends. So just for some context, I had three different roles at Rapid7. So I started off as a cybersecurity advisor, and that was very much kind of customer facing, and I was a subject matter expert on one of their products, so Insight IDR, which is their EDR solution.
Mhm.
Um, and so a lot of the interview questions there were sure about like EDR, like what is um, gosh, like talking about like different kinds of detections, like what is the difference between like an IOC based detection and a behavioral based detection? What, let's see, basic like cybersecurity stuff about like TCP/IP or
Mhm.
I don't know. Gosh, let's see. I've got like this whole list. Like, how would you validate a false positive? What is a cyber kill chain? And how does the TCP handshake work? And like basic stuff like that. And then there was stuff that was more customer oriented. So like, how would you handle an objection from a customer, or how would you handle if we are dealing with some like a customer who is potentially being compromised, right? And they're angry with you, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage this, right? Because that is something that we had to do, is call people to tell them, hey, you're being popped right now. Like you need to
Yeah.
we need to take this machine offline,
Yep.
and that can be really stressful, right? Um,
Yeah.
so that's that. Let's see. The SOC analyst role was definitely a little bit like way more technical, like
Mhm.
how do you like where would you look for signs of persistence? How like what kinds of common lolbins are used by attackers, things like that. Um, let's see. Yeah, what does botnet activity look like? How does certain types of malware work, or how would you detect it, kinds of things. And then let's see, I worked as a security solutions engineer for a while too. That role was a lot more so another security engineer, right? But
Yeah,
solutions engineer
exactly.
is a lot more product related, right? So I was pre-sales. So essentially that role is as customers are going through the process of trying to decide what products to purchase, they come to you to ask the technical questions, right? So like they've got the sales team who's going out there and finding people who are interested. And then it's kind of like when the customers have questions about how it works, how it's going to link up with all of their log sources, what kinds of things can we ingest, what kinds of things do we detect? That's kind of the solutions engineer's role, is to talk about that. So that particular, a lot of those interview questions were more around product, like specific products, what kinds of features that they have, what would you sell in this particular situation, or how does this, if the customer is looking to solve this problem, what does that align with in our products, that kind of thing. And then this last role as a threat intelligence analyst was a lot more to do with, there's definitely malware, right? And so because a lot of what we do in this role is briefing customers, that there's a pretty heavy stress on that, right? So customer asks you a question about how this particular malware works. How would you go about answering this question, right? So it can be a little bit more broad in that way, because it's not as specific, the information that we're always getting or needing to find. And then, of course, for that one in particular, too, of course, I had to give a briefing, on a particular type of malware. They asked me what were my favorite threat actors, which I actually didn't have an answer for at the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, right. Because it's just not how I was looking at it, right? Especially from more SOC analyst background, where it's like I can tell you like what malware I think is interesting, but like what threat actor, I don't really know, because we didn't do attribution at Rapid7. That was like something that was very clear. Like we don't do that. We don't poke, what do you call it? Point fingers. Kind of. So yeah, I don't know if that's enough questions.
I think that's a lot. I think you've also demonstrated a good ability for memory recall over there too, bringing up questions. So I think that's really good. That was really helpful. I think something that I was picking up on a lot as well too with your answers was strong communicating skills, the ability to package something up concisely and deliver it to your stakeholder or whoever's asking the questions. So
definitely. Yeah,
definitely some strong skill sets.
And here's a fun interview tip, right? So for example, that one where they're like, what is your favorite threat actor? Never just say, I don't know, right? That's
throw something out, right?
Yeah, you can, but find a way to connect something that you do know, right? That's like relevant, so that it shows that you have domain knowledge, even if it's not exactly the question that they're looking to answer, right? So a lot of times what I'll do, if I can't answer a question like directly, is I'll just start kind of like, and this also helps my anxiety, right? Is just kind of spitballing all of the things that I know that are related to it. So, okay, well, I don't know like this particular thing, and I won't say that, but so this is related to this, and kind of like drawing the picture, which helps me kind of like bring my thoughts together, and it also shows that I know what I'm talking about, even if I don't know the exact answer to their question.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Because a lot of these questions they're just trying to fish a little bit for what's inside your head, right? Like how can you compile an answer, and maybe it's in sync with what they're looking for or not. But I think that's a really great point that you're adding over there. Never go with I don't know.
Yeah.
try and lead with something, right? That's a good choice. So, okay, you've been in the field now. I think that covers a lot about, I guess, the segue, how you got into it. In terms of being on the job, how has it compared to your expectations? So before you got into cybersecurity and you were training and learning all about it, ethical hacking and all that stuff sounded cool. You can get paid for it, right? As you said. Is the job a lot like how you thought it was going to be?
That's a really great question. I think so. It just kind of depends on like where in my understanding of cybersecurity we're comparing this to, right? Like now versus when I was a teenager, completely different, right? Like I'm assuming that probably back then I was just thinking hackers that are working in different places in dark rooms, And then as I started learning about it, I think that honestly, one of my biggest fears was working in an office, and any of my friends will tell you that like I was extremely reluctant to get into IT because I did not want to work in an office. And lo and behold, I still don't work in an office, which is amazing. But I think that that was something that was on my mind, and I think that the kind of ability to work in different places with remote teams. That's not something that I was expecting, and I don't think any of us were really expecting before the pandemic happened anyway. So I think even to the people who have been working here for a while, perhaps it's somewhat new. But I will say that the thing that surprised me the most is
Mhm.
the people.
Yeah?
I think, yeah, like the culture
Interesting
of
statement. Yeah, okay.
security,
Okay.
I think there like every conference I go to, I'm just reminded at like how psyched I am to work in this industry because the people are just awesome.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of tricksters and pranksters and people who enjoy, I don't know, just like thinking about things in a similar way that I do, just like that hacker mindset, right? And everyone's very friendly and helpful. I mean, mostly, I won't say everyone, but for the most part, I think as a whole, the industry is very like open-minded and welcoming to new people and interested in teaching. And I just love seeing that kind of like open approach, I guess.
That's a really interesting answer. I haven't actually heard that one specifically before. So you got interested in cybersecurity a lot from the tech and the freedom to build, basically something that could line up with your life and your personal interests. And
Mhm.
then you have found it much more interesting after the fact just because of the people. And I think
Mhm.
it's very easy that people forget just how human centric cybersecurity actually is and how much involvement there is working with other people, a lot of communication, a lot of you in the trenches kind of day to day. So it sounds like you've sort of found your, I guess, like your group, your people, people
Oh,
that you can relate to.
yeah,
So
and I don't know, I think that especially working remote, it can get pretty, like, lonely to work in an office by yourself all the time, so if anyone is in that position, I highly recommend, like, seeking out meetups and things like that, right? Like, I love being able to meet with the people locally, like, once a month and going to, local conferences and stuff like that, and meeting more people, and yeah, it doesn't have to be like that even if you work remotely, I guess is
yeah.
what I'm saying.
Interesting. Cool. Good, good, good. So, all right. So, I guess maybe we're actually covering a lot of ground. I want to leave some room for some Q&A here towards the end as well. But maybe tell us a little bit more about, I guess, your current day to day. So, with Threat Intelligence Analyst, maybe walk us through like what is a day in the life of Natasha right now in your remote IT office over there? What's it
Alright.
actually like? Yeah.
So I am very much a routine person, so I try to keep it as regular from day to day as possible. But usually my day starts and I like make my coffee and or my tea or whatever it is while I'm listening to the news. So like CyberWire Daily is like a something that I listen to every day, at
Mhm.
least when I'm working. Love listening to that. And then once that's done, I'll kind of like pull up my news feeds. So I'm reading through just cybersecurity news in general, trying to find anything that's interesting that's going on, and then also reading through some of our internal campaigns, for example, to like see what's going on there. Because and this is like an interesting thing, right? If you work for a company that has data from a lot of different places around the world like we do, you can see trends that are happening in the landscape much better than any individual can, right? So that's a fun part of the day, is kind of going through the campaigns that we're seeing, and seeing like what kind of trends are happening, whether it's like week to week or month to month or whatever it might be. And then from there, like usually I have a sync with my team and we talk about what we're seeing, what are some interesting things. We have a number of different deliverables that we provide. So usually they're all kind of based on what's trending in the threat landscape, and like different formats, I guess. And so
Mhm.
we'll talk about what we're seeing and what we want to use for those deliverables. And then the rest of the day is a lot of briefings, it's like creating briefings, doing analysis on like different customers and what's going on within their telemetry, and trying to pull conclusions, to create that finished intelligence for them and then presenting it. So that's essentially my day to day.
Very interesting. Cool. Yeah, because I know we have quite a few students. People really like the idea of threat intelligence, right? Like it's like this research type of field, navigating what current threats are doing, what their attack patterns, and that whole attribution piece that you mentioned as well too. So that's interesting. A lot of students are quite intrigued by this area
Yeah.
as well.
And I'll say that like it's there's different parts of this, right? So like
Mhm.
there's kind of two sides to this role in a way,
Yeah, that's
right?
good to elaborate. Yeah.
There's there's two counterparts. So we have the threat research team, which is the ones who are creating the campaigns, right? So they're doing the malware analysis. They are looking at the trends. They're like looking for overlapping IOCs, like doing that research and putting a campaign together. So that's threat research. And then we have on my side is like threat intel services. So we're the ones who are taking that information and then finishing it and packaging it for customer consumption, essentially, right? So if you're interested in like threat intelligence and that kind of like threat research side, Proofpoint has a podcast called Discarded, where one of our lead threat researchers, or staff threat researcher, I think, talks about the different campaigns that we're seeing. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check that out. I think that that's super interesting.
How much report writing is involved?
There's a fair amount of report writing.
Yeah. Okay, good. Just want to highlight that. Yeah.
I wrote one this morning and I'm writing another one today. I created 5 briefings this week, and presented all of them. So there's a lot of writing involved for sure. But it's also, I think, really interesting, right? Because whatever the topic may be, like you're researching or doing some, OSINT research, trying to find like any connections with past campaigns, things like that. So yeah. I think I like digging into that kind of stuff. So if you like that, and yes, the writing is part of it, but
yep, comes with it. Cool. Nice. So I got a question over here from Karina. Natasha, you mentioned deliverables. Could you say what those are if you haven't already?
Sure.
I guess reports you just mentioned. I guess one of them.
Yeah. So we have a few different things. Let's see. So of course we have like our briefings that we're delivering to customers. We also have we try to do 3 a week of these. We call them logbooks, but they're like summaries of interesting campaigns that we're seeing or trends in the landscape. So I'm about to write one about, what is it called? There is a new type of and kind of first stage payload that we're seeing someone, or like the Ransom Hub affiliates working with, which I thought was really interesting. So I'll be writing about that this afternoon. We have kind of a weekly summary about what's happening in the threat landscape. We have one deliverable, which is essentially for our security awareness training people, so we send that over to them so that they can create content around that for security awareness training for our customers. So I think that's most of them.
Cool. I think that covers some good answers over there. Awesome.
Yeah, and then there's like IOC polls that we do too, right? So from our top campaigns, we're doing daily IOC polls that we're then sending out so that customers can ingest those in their SIMs and stuff like that.
Nice. Mm-hmm. That'd be interesting. So how technical does that IOC poll get? Like, are you, I guess, without kind of leading you in any direction, maybe just tell me how technical does it actually get? Because I know that's a question I've been asked before by quite a few students, and I have my own answer, but what would you say to that?
I mean, so the IOC poll is, it's pretty simple, right? Because we're not grouping those IOCs. Basically, we're just looking at some of the top campaigns, and then we're grabbing the IOCs that are associated with it. So when threat research is creating those campaigns, they're adding any IOCs that they're seeing in that activity. So whether it's IP addresses, domains, things like that, like hashes, whatnot, those are all going into it, and then. So I don't know, like when you're saying how technical is it?
I mean, like, are you working with code? I mean, do you have to?
Oh, no.
Okay, yeah. I guess that's what I'm looking for, which is interesting because I know some students get quite, intimidated. They think they have to be like master programmers. They have to be able to like reverse engineer malware to the assembly level and everything. And
yeah,
to some degree, perhaps, but not all the time.
Right? Yeah, so I'd say that like that's the threat research side of it, right? So they're the ones who are kind of pulling apart the malware and running a sandbox, seeing what it's trying to connect to, things like that. Like they're doing a lot of that analysis, and then we just kind of get like the nicely packaged, like here are the IOCs that are associated with this campaign kind of thing, right? So from this part of the role, it doesn't have to be that technical. And honestly, like there are a lot of people on my team who'd never worked in cybersecurity before. I think that probably about half of them had not. One of my coworkers was like a librarian beforehand, so like all over the place.
Yeah, strong research skills, communication, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Helps. Cool. Well, here's a question from CI over here. Do you enjoy report writing, Natasha, or just the sexy stuff?
Man, I like writing reports if I find the content interesting and
Mhm.
if it's new, right? So like if it's something that I'm reporting on that I think is like kind of new, and like when you say like the sexy stuff, to me that is sexy, right? Like finding
Fair
something
enough.
that's like new and interesting to report to our customers. Like
Mhm.
I don't know if you all heard about this, but there's this interesting um technique that people are using called device code phishing, where they're using the device code authentication process or like exploiting that in order to gain access or unauthorized access to people's accounts, which I thought was super interesting. Um, yeah, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, there's not a lot of this happening, but it is a very novel
Yeah.
technique.
Interesting. Cool. Good answer. Yeah. What about over here? Another one from Korean in the chat. Trying to understand how your customers use your reports. Are your customers like, are they actually in a SOC? Are they just SOCs? Or, for example, corporations who are engaged with their security?
It all depends, right?
Mm.
So
There's that answer. Yeah.
yeah, most of our customers are pretty big,
Mhm.
for the most part, but we do have some like smaller organizations too. And I think it, when I say it depends on the size of the organization and how granular they are, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes a SOC is like there's one SOC analyst, and that's like one of three people on a security team, right? So in those cases, yeah, we're like, are you asking if they are SOCs? Hmm. I mean, that kind of overlaps still, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Corporations who are engaged with their security. Yeah. So usually we're talking to internal organizations, like their own security, right? So like if they're
Mhm.
outsourcing their SOC, we're not talking to them, for example. So we're not like a provider to provider, if that makes sense. We're provider to end user. I hope that answers the question.
I think it answers the question. Yeah. So it kind of like depends on the outfit. You might be in internal security, you might be external, sort of depending, right? So,
Hmm.
question from Jordan next. Would you get feedback on how your reports have helped SOCs improve? Basically, do you see the fruits of your work? That's pretty cool. to
Yeah,
think about,
I
yeah.
mean, sometimes not, right? I think
Mhm.
that it's always kind of hard to get an idea for the impact of our work overall in security in the organization, especially when we're working with some of the larger companies, because
Mhm.
like the people that we're interacting with are just a small piece of a giant puzzle, right? And so I do love to hear when people tell me about like the impacts of what we're doing, because there are some cases that we've been able to catch, like for example, impersonation happens a lot, especially with like larger brands where
Mhm.
threat actors are impersonating a company, and trying to get people to like click on a link or whatever it might be, right? And in those cases, right, we can tell them, hey, that there are people who are impersonating your brand. You might want to let your users know that this is happening.
Mhm.
Somewhere like that. Yeah, so sometimes the answer is sometimes, I
Yeah.
guess.
It's always depends. It always depends is
Yeah.
the answer. Yeah. But I mean, I think you answered it, right? Is like sometimes you do get to see that direct impact, which is quite
Mhm.
nice instead of just sort of being tunneled away. And I think some students are, I guess, I wouldn't say intimidated, but maybe they might feel like they might not be able to deliver value. I've heard that from students say before too.
Mm.
Like, I don't want to just be staring at a screen all day, not talking to anyone, not being able to ultimately impact anything, and kind of just being tucked away to the side. So it's great to hear that you are much more interactive with your role. So there are cybersecurity positions like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll
Mhm.
say that like probably more often than feeling like I've had an impact is just having good discussions, right? Like
Mhm.
one of the reasons that I moved to this role from the security engineer role was because I felt like the security, like solutions engineering role wasn't as technical as I wanted it to be, and I wasn't staying up to date. It wasn't required that I stay up to date with what was happening in the threat landscape, which I think is the most interesting part about being in security, is like knowing what's happening right now. Um, but I think that being able to just have conversations with people about that stuff, right, is like what I find to be very rewarding and interesting about this particular job. And you know, uh, there are other roles such as like being a SOC analyst, which I was for a while, which didn't have a lot of people interaction, right? Like I
Yeah.
wasn't able to talk to people, and that could be kind of hard. But I will
Mhm.
say that like my background there has helped me to relate to people, right? To internal security teams a lot better than I would if I hadn't had that experience.
Awesome. Good answers, good insight. So definitely coming up to time over here. I got a question for you, Natasha. Um, What advice would you ultimately give, looking back on your career right now and where you've come to? If you were to give yourself advice and maybe to students getting started right now, what would you tell them to focus on? And maybe, I guess, also thinking ahead, right? Like where we're going in this industry. What would you
Yeah.
tell them to do?
I would say, okay, for anyone who's just starting, I would say follow your curiosity as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
Because you have no idea where it's going to get you, right? And there are things that are possible that you would have never known are possible. And then also always be on the lookout for opportunities, even if it is within your role, right? So, for example, right now I am co-leading a initiative to bring AI to solutions to our team. So
Mm-hmm.
wasn't expecting that because that was not part of the description, but it is something that overall my company is moving towards is implementing AI in different parts of our organization. And it's something that is a hot topic and it's a skill that's going to be useful, right? So like always keeping an eye out and networking with people to see when those opportunities might arise.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely an important thing to do just for your own career. And
Yeah.
then of course, I think like my biggest piece of advice for anyone who's starting out is find good mentors. Like I cannot say enough how important and like how grateful I am for all of the mentors that I've had over my career who have, I don't know, just like either kept me on track or given me advice in moments where I wasn't so sure like if I should take this role or not, or if I should apply, whatever it might be. And then yeah, I think just like providing me with connections or insight or, hey, like, have you ever maybe thought about this thing? Because talking to you, I feel like this is something you're really passionate about. Like that might,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is, might not have ever been on my radar, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
also having kind of like a point to grow towards, right? Like some of my mentors, the things that I find inspiring in them are like, that's why I want to talk to them. And they tell me about those things. And I'm like, yes, I'm keeping my curiosity alive and moving in that direction in keeping up with them. So yeah, I think mentorship is extremely important.
So important. That's
Mhm.
awesome. Yeah, really, really good, insightful answers. I agree with exactly with what you're saying personally as well too. I don't think anyone can do this, or rather, should do this alone. I would say. I think having someone to work with and having a mentor, I fully agree on as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Or a few, like I've got a
yeah.
few for different things,
Mhm.
and yeah, and honestly, even having some conflicting advice sometimes is great.
It's good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think having it's okay to have someone disagree with you and be able to see their point of view. Right. I think that's
Mhm.
quite important. So one other, I think we got one last question over here, and then we're going to be wrapping it up. This is a good one. If you became a recruiter in the future, Natasha, what would you ideally look for in someone entering?
So it's actually kind of funny that you say that because sometimes I see myself as a recruiter. I think I got like 8 or 10 people hired to
Hmm.
Rapid7 in my time there, like
Well,
referring
there.
them. Yeah, and what I usually look for is someone who's like easy to get along with, knows who they're like what they're talking about, is passionate and is like capable of learning, right? And like has some level of self-direction. I think the thing about cybersecurity is like while yeah, it's an area of expertise, it's one of those things that's so fluid in a lot of ways, and you kind of like you learn the skills that you need as you go along, right? Like
Yeah.
no one's expected to be like a perfect expert for the most part, like when you're
Mhm.
starting off in like your first role, right? But if you can demonstrate to me that know you can self-source that kind of stuff, right? So you know where to look, you know that you have, like these kinds of resources, or you can show me how you've done something like that in the past and like being able to teach yourself how to do something or find the right resources if you don't know what they are. I think that that's all really good. And then, of course, like, can you work well in a team kind of
Mhm.
thing? I think that's also very important. Yeah, I think those are some of the most important things.
Awesome. Really good answers as well. That's really important. It's so fluid. It changes all the time, week to week, month to month.
Yeah.
Look what you said right there. Yeah, you're now going to be part of the initiative, right? Integrating some AI solutions into your threat intelligence life cycle. So very cool.
Yeah.
Natasha, we're coming up in time over here. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? Any parting advice? Any parting comments? Anything you want to share about yourself? Anything that you're working on right now that you want people to know about?
No, I don't think so. Mostly, yeah, I wish I had some more exciting, like, shiny projects that I could share with you, but nothing that I'm doing right now is really, like, out in the public domain.
Yep.
So, yeah, just good luck, everyone, and thanks for having me. Feel free
Okay.
to reach out if you'd like. Maybe I'll send my LinkedIn information to Anthony so you can post it somewhere.
Yeah, this will go up as a recording on our socials. So then we'll add those piece of information to the recording over there on the little description at the bottom. But other than that, I guess, thank you everyone in chat over here for spending your time with us here on Friday with our first episode. Natasha over here joining us, former alumni, now threat intelligence analyst in the field. Ton of great information that she just delivered to you. So I think you got a lot of intelligence on the field that she was able to debrief you with this afternoon. Natasha, thank you. Thank you for being here with us and spending some time. And good to see you succeeding and continuing to succeed in the field as well, too.
Thanks for all your help in my success.
Team sport, right? That's what this is. So
Yep, for sure.
awesome.
Right.
Cool. Well, thank you again, everyone. I'm going to end the stream over here, and this will go up again on our social, like I said. Have a good rest of your week and weekend, and we'll see you for the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.